Grand Admiral Thiessen Varath stood before the massive viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched his 2,400 warships emerge from hyperspace. Behind him, like a swarm of angry predators, the sight filled his four hearts with pride. This was the largest invasion fleet the Valkyrie Empire had ever assembled in its 3,000-year history of conquest, and he had been chosen to lead it against a world that had dared to insult the Emperor himself, Earth. He had studied the intelligence reports for months, and he knew everything there was to know about this small blue planet and its primitive inhabitants. The humans had only discovered space travel a little over a century ago, and they still used chemical rockets and basic fusion drives to move between their planets. They had no shields worth mentioning, and no weapons that could scratch the hull of even his smallest patrol craft. They had not even achieved faster than light travel yet, and were trapped in their tiny solar system like animals in a cage. And yet these pathetic creatures had refused to submit to Valkyrie rule when the Empire's diplomatic vessel had arrived 3 years ago with a simple demand for tribute and obedience. The humans had actually laughed and told the ambassador to leave. Laughed at the Valkyrie Empire. The Emperor had not taken this insult well, and so here Varath was with enough firepower to crack a planet in half, sent to teach these ignorant apes their place in the galaxy. Status report, he commanded, his voice echoing across the bridge. His tactical officer, a young female named Kiris, responded immediately. All ships have successfully exited hyperspace. Grand Admiral, and the fleet is in perfect formation, with no mechanical failures reported from any vessel. Excellent, Varath said with satisfaction. Begin the approach to the third planet and have all weapon systems brought to full readiness. At once, Grand Admiral. The massive fleet began to move as one, engines glowing bright blue against the darkness of space as they aimed themselves at the small blue world in the distance. Varath clasped his four hands behind his back and allowed himself a moment of anticipation. This conquest would be recorded in the great histories of the Empire, and his name would be remembered for 10,000 years as the admiral who brought humanity to heel. He was already composing his victory address in his mind, imagining the look on the Emperor's face when he presented Earth's leaders in chains. Grand Admiral, Kiris said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of confusion. I am detecting something strange. What is it? The humans, sir, they are not reacting to our presence at all. Varath turned to look at her with all four of his eyes. Explain. Our sensors show that their orbital stations are continuing normal operations and their communication satellites are still broadcasting their entertainment signals, Kira said while studying her display. There are no defensive preparations visible, and no evacuation orders being transmitted, and no military vessels moving to intercept us. Perhaps they have not detected us yet, suggested Commander Drexel. Varath second in command, impossible, Kiris replied. Their sensor technology may be primitive, but they should have spotted a fleet this size the moment we exited hyperspace, and we are making no attempt to hide our approach. Varath considered this information and then let out a low laugh. They are paralyzed with fear. He decided, they have seen our fleet, and they know the resistance is futile, so they are simply waiting for the inevitable. That would explain it. Sir, Drexel agreed with a nod, but Kiris did not look convinced, and her scaled brow was furrowed with concern. Sir, if I may speak freely, you may. Something feels wrong about this, she said carefully. I have participated in 47 planetary invasions, and I have never seen a species simply ignore an approaching enemy fleet like this. Not even species that knew they were doomed. You are young, Kiris, Varath said dismissively. Humans are known throughout the galaxy as irrational and unpredictable creatures who are incapable of logical thought, and perhaps this is simply another example of their foolishness. Yes, Grand Admiral, but Varath noticed that she continued to study her sensors with an intensity that bordered on obsession, and he filed that observation away for later consideration. Perhaps the young officer was simply nervous. It was, after all, her first time serving directly under a Grand Admiral. The hours passed slowly as the fleet crossed the vast distances between the outer planets and the inner system, where Earth-weighted Varath used the time productively, reviewing invasion protocols and assigning landing zones and selecting which cities would be destroyed. First, as a demonstration of Valkyrie power, he had decided on 3 major population centers, one from each of the largest human nations, as that would show the primitives that nowhere on their world was safe from imperial justice. Grand Admiral Kira said as they passed the 4th planet, a rusty red world the humans called Mars. I have a suggestion. Speak. Perhaps we should send a scout squadron ahead to assess the orbital defenses before the main fleet arrives, she said. Standard protocol for any invasion calls for reconnaissance before engagement. Varath waved a dismissive hand. There is no need for such caution against primitives who cannot even leave their own system. Sir, with respect, we know very little about what the humans have developed in the years since our last intelligence assessment, and they may have surprises waiting for us. The Grand Admiral considered her words, and while he thought she was being excessively paranoid, he also knew that a good commander listened to the concerns of his officers. Very well, he said. Send the 3rd Scout Squadron ahead to eliminate any orbital defenses and report back on enemy positions. Yes, Grand Admiral. Kiris transmitted the orders, and 12 sleek destroyers broke formation, accelerating ahead of the main fleet at maximum speed. Watch them go with satisfaction. The scouts would clear the path, and then the main fleet would sweep in and crush any remaining resistance before landing troops to occupy the major cities within a week. Earth would belong to the Empire within a month. Its resources would be flowing to Valkyrie homeworlds within a year. Its people would be productive slaves contributing to imperial glory. This was the natural order of things, and it had worked flawlessly for 3,000 years, across 800 conquered worlds. There was no reason to think this invasion would be any different. Varath turned his attention back to the viewport and watched as Earth grew slowly larger in the distance. A beautiful blue jewel that would soon have a new owner. He did not notice that Kiris had gone very still at her station. He did not see the color drain from her scaled face as she stared at her sensor display. He did not hear her whisper a prayer to gods she had not believed in since childhood, because the 3rd Scout Squadron had just vanished from her screens without a trace. No distress calls, no weapons fire, no debris. 12 warships carrying 6,000 Valkyrie warriors had simply ceased to exist in the span of a single heartbeat, and Kiris knew with terrible certainty that something had gone very, very wrong. Kiris stared at her sensor display for a long moment, certain that she must be misreading the data somehow. But no matter how many times she checked and rechecked the readings, the result was always the same. The 3rd Scout Squadron was gone, Grand Admiral, she said, and she hated how her voice trembled. We have lost contact with the scouts. Varath turned to face her with an expression of mild annoyance. Lost contact? What do you mean lost contact? They have vanished from our sensors, sir. All 12 ships simultaneously. That is impossible, Varath said firmly. Check your equipment for malfunctions. I have already done so 3 times, Grand Admiral. And the sensors are functioning perfectly. Commander, Drexel stepped forward with concern on his face. Could they have entered some kind of natural phenomenon? A radiation field or gravitational anomaly that blocks our scanners. There is nothing like that in this system, Kiris replied. I have checked the stellar charts, and there are no unusual phenomena between our position and Earth. Varath's 4 eyes narrowed with displeasure. Then the humans must have destroyed them with some hidden weapon, sir. We detected no weapons fire of any kind, Kira said carefully. No energy signatures, and no missile launches, and no explosions. They simply disappeared from our sensors as if they never existed. Heavy silence fell over the bridge as the implications of her words sank. In the Valkyrie were a proud warrior race who'd conquered hundreds of worlds. But they were not stupid, and every officer on that bridge understood that 12 warships do not simply vanish without explanation. Send the 14th Battle Group to investigate, Vorath ordered, his voice harder now. 60 ships in full combat formation with shields at maximum and weapons hot. Yes, Grand Admiral. The orders went out and 60 of the Empire's finest warships broke away from the main fleet. Their captains, eager to avenge their fallen comrades and prove their worth. To the Grand Admiralvarath watched them go with confident 60 ships was more than enough firepower to destroy anything the humans could possibly throw at them and whatever trick the primitives had used against. The scouts would not work against a full battle. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness on the bridge. Every officer watched their stations with intense focus, waiting for the battle group to engage the enemy and report their victory, but the reports never came instead. Kiris made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Grand Admiral. The 14th Battle Group has been destroyed. What? All 60 ships are gone. Sir, in less than 2 seconds, Vorath stormed over to her station and shoved her aside so he could see the sensor logs himself. What he saw made his blood run cold. Recordings showed the battle group approaching, Earth in perfect formation, when suddenly something appeared among them. It was small, impossibly small. No larger than a single Valkyrie warrior, and it was moving at a speed that should have been physically impossible. Nearly half the speed of light according to the computer's calculations in the span of 2 heartbeats. That tiny object passed through all 60 warships like a needle through fabric. The ships did not explode. They did not burn. They simply fell apart. Their hulls sliced into thousands of pieces by something moving so fast that their shields might as well have been made of paper. That cannot be right, Vorath whispered. The computer must be malfunctioning. Sir, I have verified the data 7 times, Kira said, her voice hollow with shock. The readings are accurate, but that would mean the object that destroyed our ships was organic, Drexel said, leaning over to study the display. The energy signature is consistent with a biological life form moving at 40% of light speed, Kiris added. That is not possible according to any known science. Vorath's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The intelligence reports had said the humans were primitives. The intelligence reports had said they had no advanced technology. The intelligence reports had been catastrophically wrong. Full stop, he commanded. All ships hauled immediately and raised shields to maximum. The fleet obeyed. 2,000 warships coming to a dead stop in the void between planets. What are your orders? Grand Admiral, Drexel Askedvareth did not answer immediately. For the first time in his long and decorated career, he did not know what to do. He had trained for every conceivable combat scenario, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for an enemy that could destroy 60 warships with what appeared to be a single individual moving at relativistic speeds. Launch sensor probes. He finally said, I want full coverage of the space between us and Earth, and I want to know what we are dealing with. Dozens of probes shot away from the fleet, spreading out in all directions to scan for any threats one by one. They began transmitting data back to the flagship one by one. They began to disappear, but before the last probe died, it sent back a single image that would haunt Vorath for the rest of his life. The image showed a human child floating in the vacuum of space. No spacesuit, no ship, no visible technology of any kind. Just A young male with dark hair and curious eyes, reaching out to touch the probe with his bare hand, and then nothing. That is a child, Drexel said in disbelief. A human child destroyed our battle group. That is not possible, Varath insisted. But his voice lacked conviction. Kiris was the one who spoke the truth that none of them wanted to hear. Grand Admiral, I do not think we are dealing with the species described in our intelligence reports. I think we have made a terrible mistake. Before Varath could respond, every screen on the bridge flickered and went dark a moment later. A new image appeared. It was a human female with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and she looked at them as one might look at children who had wandered somewhere they should not be. "Hello," she said, her voice somehow carrying warmth despite the impossible situation. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chun, and I think we need to have a conversation about what you are doing in our solar system." Varath found that he could not speak for the first time in his life. The Grand Admiral of the Imperial Fleet was afraid. Dr. Sarah Chun's image floated on every screen aboard every ship in the fleet, and her gentle smile seemed somehow more terrifying than any weapon the Volcari had ever faced. Varath forced himself to speak, drawing on decades of military discipline to keep his voice steady. "I am Grand Admiral Thiessen Varath of the Volcari Imperial Fleet, and I demand to know how you are accessing our communication systems." "Oh, that part is easy," Dr. Chen replied with a small laugh. "Your encryption technology is based on mathematical principles that we solved about 200 years ago, and breaking through it took me roughly 3 seconds." "That is impossible. You keep using that word," she said, tilting her head with amusement. "I do not think it means what you think it means." Commander Drexel stepped forward with anger on his face. "You will show proper respect to the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Fleet." Human Dr. Chen's smile never wavered. "I mean no disrespect, Commander, but I think there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of our respective species, and I would like to clear that up before my son gets bored and does something we might all regret." "Your son," Varath repeated, remembering the image of the child floating in space. "Yes. His name is Marcus, and he is 13 years old, and he thinks your ships are very interesting," Dr. Chun said. "He's the one who has been taking them apart, you see, and I've asked him to pause so we can have this conversation. A child destroyed 72 of my warships. Well, technically, he only destroyed 71, she corrected. The last one he accidentally tore in half while trying to figure out how your hyperspace drives work, and he feels quite bad about that." Varath's mind could not process what he was hearing. A human child had single-handedly eliminated a significant portion of his fleet, and the mother was apologizing for the inconvenience as if discussing a broken toy. "What are you?" he demanded, dropping all pretense of diplomatic language. Dr. Chen's expression softened with something that looked almost like sympathy. "That is actually a very good question, Grand Admiral, and I appreciate you asking it directly rather than making more threats." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "What we are is something your empire has never encountered before. Something that the intelligence reports you relied upon could not have prepared you for because the truth would have seemed too unbelievable." "Explain." "Humanity discovered faster than light travel 73 years ago," Dr. Chun began. "We have been working on the theoretical physics for decades, and the breakthrough came almost by accident when a graduate student in Tokyo noticed an error in the standard equations. That contradicts everything we know about your species." "Yes, it would," she agreed, "because we chose not to advertise our capabilities to the wider galaxy, and we had very good reasons for that choice." Darchun touched something off-screen, and a series of images appeared alongside her face. They showed human ships, but not the primitive chemical rockets the Velkari had expected. These were vessels that defied conventional physics. their designs suggesting technologies that the Empire had never even theorized. 40 years ago, we developed dimensional folding technology, she continued. This allowed us to create pocket universes, manipulate the fabric of space-time itself, and travel between galaxies as easily as you might travel between rooms in your home. This cannot be true, but it is, she said simply. And 30 years ago, we achieved what we call biological transcendence. The images changed again, showing humans doing impossible things, a woman walking on the surface of a star, a man reshaping an asteroid with his bare hands, children playing in the corona of a supernova, laughing as nuclear fire washed over them harmlessly. We merged human consciousness with quantum state matter, Dr. Chun explained. This process grants us effective immortality, the ability to manipulate reality at the subatomic level, and existence across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Varath felt his legs grow weak, and he had to grip the edge of a console to remain standing. If what you say is true, then why do you still live on that planet? He asked, gesturing toward Earth on the view screen. Why do you drive ground vehicles and watch primitive entertainment broadcasts and pretend to be a young species? Dr. Chun's smile became something warmer, something almost nostalgic, because we like it, she said. Because after you have reshaped galaxies and walked between dimensions and lived for centuries, you start to miss the simple things. She looked away from the camera for a moment. I was born in a small town in what used to be called Canada, and I remember the smell of pine trees after rain and the taste of my grandmother's cooking and the feeling of falling asleep in front of a fire on a winter night. Her eyes returned to the screen. Those memories matter to me, and living a simple life on Earth helps me stay connected to them. You were saying that your entire species chose to limit itself. Not limit, she corrected gently. We chose to remember who we were and where we came from. We chose to raise our children with an appreciation for ordinary joys. We chose peace and contentment over endless expansion and conquest. Commander Drexel made a sound of disbelief. You expect us to believe that beings with the power to destroy stars decided to spend their time watching entertainment broadcasts and raising families. I do not expect anything, Dr. Chun replied. I am simply telling you the truth. She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. Grand Admiral, you need to understand something very important about what is happening here today. Varath met her eyes, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. You did not come here to conquer a primitive world, she said. You wandered into the retirement home of an elder species, and the only reason your fleet still exists is because we remember what it was like to be young and aggressive and frightened of the dark. What do you want from us? Nothing, she said. And somehow that single word was more devastating than any threat could have been. We want nothing from you at all. On the tactical display, Varath could see the human child Marcus still floating in space behind the fleet, waiting patiently for his mother to finish talking, and for the first time, the Grand Admiral understood just how badly he had miscalculated. Grand Admiral Varath stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship as the impossible truth crashed over him like a wave. Everything he had believed about this mission was wrong. Everything he had believed about humanity was wrong. Everything he had believed about the natural order of the galaxy was wrong. Full retreat, he commanded, his voice cutting through the shocked silence of his bridge crew. All ships activate hyperspace drives and return to Imperial space immediately. Officers scrambled to obey, their fingers flying across control panels as they desperately tried to flee from a threat they could not comprehend. But nothing happened. Grand Admiral, Kiris said, her voice trembling, the hyperspace drives are not responding. What do you mean not responding? Something is holding us in normal space. Sir, some kind of field that prevents the drives from engaging on the view screen. Dar-chun shook her head with what looked like genuine regret. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "But I really do need you to listen to what I have to say, and I was worried you might leave before I finished. You are holding 2,000 warships in place against their will." "Yes." "How?" "It is a simple manipulation of the local space-time geometry," she explained, as if discussing the weather. "Marcus could probably explain it better than I can, since he just learned about it in school last semester, and I have forgotten most of the technical details." Varath felt something inside him crack. This woman was treating the immobilization of the largest fleet in Imperial history as a trivial inconvenience. The kind of thing a child might learn in school, Grand Admiral. Commander Drexel said urgently. "We should attack while we have the chance." "Attack what?" Varath asked bitterly. "A child who can move at half the speed of light. A woman who can hold our entire fleet motionless with a thought. We cannot simply surrender." "I am not suggesting surrender, Commander. I am suggesting that we stop and think before doing something that will get us all killed." But Drexel had never been good at thinking. Was a warrior, trained from birth to respond to threats with overwhelming force. And every instinct he had was screaming at him to fight back before Varath could stop him. Drexel lunged for the weapons console and began inputting targeting commands. "Fire everything at the child," he shouted. "All ships concentrate fire now, across the fleet." Weapons officers who were just as frightened and desperate as Drexel obeyed the command without waiting for authorization. Plasma lances erupted from 1,000 ships, their brilliant blue beams converging on the small figure floating in space. Animator torpedoes followed, hundreds of them, each one carrying enough destructive power to crack a small moon. Graviton beams reached out like invisible fingers, trying to crush the child with forces that could compress planets for a single heartbeat. The concentrated firepower of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy focused on one 13-year-old boy, and Marcus caught one of the torpedoes in his hand, turned it over curiously, examining the casing with the interest of a child who had found an unusual rock. And then he tossed it aside with a casual flick of his wrist. The torpedo detonated harmlessly against a pocket of folded space that appeared from nowhere, its devastating power contained in a bubble no larger than a house. The plasma lances bent around him as if deflected by an invisible shield. The graviton beams simply passed through his body without effect, and then Marcus looked directly at the flagship's external cameras, and he actually smiled. "Mom." His voice echoed through every speaker on every ship simultaneously. "This is really boring, and they keep shooting at me even though it does not do anything." Dar-chun sighed with the weary patience of a mother who had dealt with this situation before. "I know, sweetheart, but I need you to be patient for just a little while longer. Can I at least take apart a few more ships? I really want to see how their power cores work." "No, Marcus, we talked about this. You cannot just take apart other people's property without asking." "But they shot at me first." "That is not an excuse, and you know it." The boy made a sound of frustration that was universally recognizable to any parent in the galaxy. "Fine," he said. "But can I at least scare them a little?" Dr. Chun hesitated, and Varath felt his heart stop beating. "Just a little," she agreed. "But no permanent damage." What happened next would haunt the dreams of every Valkyrie on that fleet for the rest of their lives. Marcus moved one moment, he was floating behind the fleet, and the next he was everywhere at once. Ships began to fold in on themselves like paper, their hulls crumpling without any apparent cause. Weapons platforms detached from their mountings and flew away into the void. Entire sections of warships simply vanished, transported somewhere else by forces beyond comprehension. But no one died. Somehow, impossibly, no one died as each ship was destroyed. Its crew found themselves encased in small bubbles of force that protected them from the vacuum of space. These bubbles drifted gently toward the red planet Mars. depositing thousands of confused and terrified Velkari on its surface imperfect. Safety Marcus was not killing them. He was handling them like misbehaving pets, and that somehow made it worse. Enough. Marcus, Dr. Chun said, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 3 minutes. The boy stopped immediately, appearing once again as a single figure floating in the void behind him. The wreckage of over 1,000 warships tumbled slowly through space, and yet every single crew member was alive, watching from their survival bubbles as their mighty fleet was reduced to scrap metal by a child who was not even trying. Only the flagship remained intact, held in place by forces that Varath could not see or understand on the bridge. Drexel had collapsed to his knees. Weeping openly, Kiris stood motionless at her station, her face blank with shock, and Varath himself simply stared at the view screen, at Dr. Chun's patient face, and wondered how his species had ever convinced itself that it was the apex predator of the galaxy. "I'm sorry about this," Dr. Chun said, and she seemed to mean it. "Truly I am." "Why?" Varath managed to ask. "Why spare us?" "Because you are young," she replied. "Because your species has potential, and because destroying you would accomplish nothing except causing unnecessary suffering." She paused, looking at him with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. "And because my son wanted to apologize for scaring you, and this seemed like the best way to show that we mean you no harm." Varath looked at the devastation surrounding his ship, the ruins of the greatest fleet the Empire had ever assembled. "You call this meaning us no harm? Your people are alive," Dr. Chun said simply. "Every single one of them. Think about what that means." Varath did think about thought about the impossible. Power that could destroy a fleet while simultaneously saving every life. He thought about the restraint required to dismantle warships without killing anyone. He thought about the kind of beings who would consider such mercy while their enemies fired every weapon they had at a child, and he finally understood the true nature of the species he had come to conquer. They were not monsters. They were something far more terrifying. They were gods who had chosen to be kind. 3 days had passed since the destruction of the Imperial fleet, and Grand Admiral Thiessen Varath stood on an observation deck above Earth, watching the planet turn slowly beneath him. He was not a prisoner. The humans had made that very clear from the moment they brought him aboard this orbital station. He was a guest, free to go wherever he wished within the facility, provided with comfortable quarters and excellent food, and anything else he requested. It was, he thought bitterly, more kindness than he deserved. The door behind him opened and Dr. Sarah Chen walked in carrying 2 cups of a steaming beverage. "I thought you might like some tea," she said, offering him one of the cups. "It is a blend from your homeworld, Thiessen. I believe it is called something like morning fire in your language." Varath took the cup automatically, too surprised to refuse. "How did you obtain this?" "We have connections throughout the galaxy," she said with a small smile. "Being effectively immortal gives you time to develop quite an extensive network." She joined him at the viewport, sipping her own drink and looking down at the planet below for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Varath watched the humans going about their lives in the cities visible from orbit. Tiny lights moving through streets and parks and buildings as if nothing unusual had happened, as if the largest invasion fleet in Galactic history had not just been erased from existence. "I have a question," he finally said. "Of course. Why do you pretend?" Darchun turned to look at him with curiosity. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your species has the power to reshape reality itself," Varath said, gesturing at the planet below. "You could live anywhere in the universe, do anything you wanted, be anything you wanted, and yet you choose to drive primitive ground vehicles and work in offices and argue about politics on your communication networks." He shook his head in disbelief. I have watched your broadcast for 3 days, and your people act as if they are still a young species struggling to find their place in the cosmos. They worry about economics and relationships, and whether their children will get into good educational institutions. Yes, Dr. Chun agreed. We do worry about all of those things. But why? None of it matters, not with the powers you possess. Dr. Chun was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the blue and green and white marble that was her home. Do you have children? Thiessen. The question surprised him. I have 3 sons and 2 daughters. And do you love them? Of course. Why? Varath opened his mouth to answer, but found that he could not put the feeling into words. Dr. Chen nodded as if he had said something profound. Love does not require a reason, she said. Neither does joy or contentment or the satisfaction of a life well lived. We did not give up our powers when we chose to live simply on Earth. We simply chose to remember that power was never the point. She set down her teacup and looked at him directly. I have lived for over 400 years. Thiessen, I have walked on worlds that your astronomers have not even discovered yet. I have watched stars die and new ones be born. I have done things that would seem like magic to most species in this galaxy. And yet here you are, drinking tea on a space station. Yes, she smiled. Because my husband is down there in our home making dinner for our son. And Marcus has a history test tomorrow that he has not studied for. And there's a garden behind our house that needs weeding before the spring rains come. She reached out and touched the viewport gently. Those things matter to me. Thiessen, they matter more than all the cosmic power in the universe. Because without them, I would just be an immortal being drifting through eternity with nothing to anchor me to anything real. Varath considered her words carefully. Your species chose to limit itself. We chose to stay human, she corrected. There is a difference. The door opened again and a young boy walked in. The same boy who had single-handedly destroyed over 1,000 warships 3 days ago. Marcus looked smaller in person. Younger. Just an ordinary child with dark hair and curious eyes. He was carrying a datapad, and he looked nervous. Mom? Is this the Grand Admiral? Yes, Marcus. This is Thiessen. The one I told you about. The boy walked over and stood in front of Varath, looking up at the towering Valkyrie with an expression that was part embarrassment and part determination. I wanted to apologize, Marcus said, for scaring you and your people. I got carried away, and that was not right. Varath stared at the child who had brought the Vrod, Empire's mightiest fleet, to its knees. You are apologizing to me. Yes. Sir, my mom says that having power does not give you the right to use it without thinking. And I should have been more careful. The Grand Admiral did not know how to respond in his entire career. No enemy had ever apologized to him for winning a battle. I made you something, Marcus continued, holding out the datapad. It is a drawing. I am not very good at art, but I thought you might like it. Varath took the datapad and looked at the screen. It showed a crude but recognizable image of a Valkyrie warship with a smiling face drawn on the hull. Beneath it, in careful letters, the boy had written 2 words, sorry, Marcus, something in. Varath's vest that had been wound tight for 3 days finally began to loosen. Thank you, he said. And he was surprised to find that he meant it. Marcus grinned with obvious relief. Mom said you are going home soon. Will you tell the other Valkyrie that we are not mean? We just want to be left alone. I will tell them. And maybe someday your people can come visit for real? Not to fight, but just to see Earth. We have really good food, and my dad makes the best pasta in the whole galaxy. Dr. Chun put her hand on her son's shoulder. Marcus, why did not you go help your father with dinner? I need to speak with the Grand Admiral privately. Okay. Bye, Thiessen. The boy waved and ran out of the room. Leaving Varath alone with Dr. Chen once again, she waited until the door closed before speaking. Your ship has been repaired and fully restocked. She said, "You can leave whenever you are ready. Just like that. Just like that." Varath looked at her with eyes that had seen too much in the past 3 days. "What message should I bring to my emperor?" Dechon walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. "Tell him that Earth is not to be touched. Not because we demand it, but because there is nothing to gain and everything to lose." She turned back to face him. "Tell him that the universe is vast and old and full of wonders that have nothing to do with conquest or empire. Tell him that there are better things to do with existence than taking from others." He will not listen. Perhaps not, she agreed. But someday his successors might. "And we have time to wait." She handed him a small crystal data chip. "This contains everything you saw here. The truth about humanity. Feel free to share it with anyone you think is ready to hear it." Varath took the chip and tucked it carefully into his uniform. "And if my people ignore your message?" "If they send another fleet," Dr. Chen smiled. And for just a moment, Varath glimpsed something ancient and powerful behind her gentle eyes. "Then Marcus will be very excited to have new ships to study. But I suspect your emperor is smarter than that." She walked him to the door. "Go home? Listen, tell your people what you learned here. And maybe someday when your species has grown up a little, we can meet again as friends instead of enemies." 1 hour later, Grand Admiral Varath sat alone on the bridge of his repaired flagship, watching Earth shrink in the rear viewport. As he began the long journey home, he thought about everything he had seen and heard and experienced. He thought about a child who could destroy fleets but apologize for being scary. He thought about a woman who had lived 4 centuries but still worried about her garden. He thought about a species that had achieved godhood and chosen to remain human. And as the hyperspace drive engaged and the stars stretched into lines around him, Varath made a decision. He would tell the Emperor the truth, all of it, not because he believed the Empire would change, but because he had looked into the eyes of beings who measured their existence in centuries and saw no malice there. Only patience infinite. Terrifying patience and the quiet certainty of a species that had all the time in the universe to wait for the galaxy to grow up.